Welcome back to RunThrough TV. It is Ben Sheppard here. Let's get this out of the way to start with, okay? If you don't subscribe to RunThrough TV, please get that done. You'll have seen we are going hard with the videos at the moment, and I really hope you're enjoying them. So please subscribe to keep up to date with everything that we've got coming on the channel. And there's lots more to come, which we are really looking forward to. Okay, let's get stuck into today's video, which if you do enjoy it at any moment, stick it a thumbs up. You're going to enjoy it because it is with one of my favourite people in the running world. Her name is Elise Downing. I've spoken to Elise a few times. She's been brilliant every time. This was no different. Back a little bit ago, Elise ran a lap of the coastal path of Great Britain. She wrote a book about it then. It is called Coasting. If you haven't read that, then it's one for the, I'm going to say it, stocking fillers this Christmas, okay? It is a brilliant conversation, this. I want to say thank you to Elise for coming on. RunThrough TV again. Check it out.
The introduction's always the worst, isn't it? I'm Elise, and about 6 years ago now, I ran a lap of the coast of Great Britain, so it's about 5,000 miles. My mum called me a one-hit wonder and said I need to do another big adventure at some point, but 6 years on, still talking about it a lot, and I wrote a book about it, which came out last year, called Coasting, and now I'm doing a lot of, I guess, kind of smaller adventures, hanging out in my van a lot, spending a lot of time outside. I'm on the North Face Explorer team, which is cool, and then, yeah, I'm just writing a guidebook of car-free adventures at the moment.
So I guess the easiest place to start is, why did you decide to run around Great Britain?
It just seemed like a good idea. I think I always say that the whole thing completely, the only way it was successful was because ignorance was bliss. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I really wasn't an experienced runner at the time. I'd not really done any ultra runs before, as in zero, none. I wasn't an experienced runner, but I think I just didn't quite realise what I was biting off. And I think if I'd done more kind of like long runs in a day and like multi-day stuff like I've done now, I just think, well, that's absolutely mad. Going for like a 3-day run with a backpack on is really hard. How can I possibly do 10 months? But I think I just didn't realise.
How did you break it up then? Because you must have looked at a map and you thought, right, this is a big thing. I'm gonna start it from here, and then I'm gonna go around, and then at some point I'll get back. But how did each day get broken up, and how did each section kind of get broken up?
Yeah, so I started in London, in Greenwich, which obviously isn't strictly by the sea, but you have to come quite a long way and cross the Thames anyway. So it only really added an extra kind of 20 miles onto the whole thing to start and finish in London. And I was living in London at the time, so that kind of made sense to me. And I went clockwise, the rough plan being to be south for the winter and then north for the summer. And I at the beginning, I think I basically did no planning, and I kept sitting down with like a notebook being like, right, I should plan this, but I think I just didn't have any idea how far I'd be able to run each day, or so it was. Whereas if I was planning that kind of thing now, I think I've got much better like awareness of like my abilities and how far I might be able to go each day and what might be reasonable. But at the time, I just had no idea. So when I set off, yeah, at the beginning, I really wasn't doing many miles a day because I just wasn't fit enough to. Very much trained on the job. And then the mileage kind of really increased over the whole thing. So I think it averages out about 15, 16 miles a day, but I was doing kind of definitely less than that at the beginning, probably more like 10 or so. And then at the end, doing more like 20, 30 miles a day. It's like mad how your body adapts just by doing something. And like now I look back and I'm like, I couldn't run that far day in, day out.
I like this story so much because it was literally like your first challenge and your biggest challenge, which I think is amazing. Because it was like that, what did your friends and family and parents say when you said, down tools in London, I'm off for a big run?
Yeah, I think because I started with something so big, that's probably why I've not done any like big things since, because it just kind of feels like, where do you go from there? Whereas I guess if I done it slowly, like build up and up and up, whereas I was like, well, I've done that, now I'm fine just doing stuff over like a few days or a week or whatever. But I think when I told people, it very much split into two categories. I found like the whole kind of like running and adventure community is so supportive, and I kept like, whenever I told people who were like more experienced adventurers and I asked their advice, they were so supportive. And they were like, yeah, do it. Sounds amazing. And I think maybe that's because they didn't know me. So they didn't know how ridiculous this was. Whereas my own friends and family were definitely a bit skeptical. Nobody really said anything at the time. Like, they were all very outwardly supportive, but they definitely sort of, like, my friend told me quite near the end that they were like, we definitely didn't think you'd make it this far. We thought you'd quit after a couple of weeks. So I think they're mostly just surprised. Like, my brother's the runner in our family, and he was just like, what? Like, at this point I'd started running and I'd done a couple of like token half marathons and stuff, but I think they were just surprised that I wanted to do it more than anything else. They were like, you want to go and spend a year outside running in a tent. So yeah, surprise, I'd say, was the main reaction.
So yeah, you mentioned the tent as well, because explain to everybody that you were pretty much self-supported. You were carrying your own gear, and then when you could maybe stay with somebody, maybe you tried to do that. But how did that all work in terms of the actual logistics of it?
Yeah, so the plan was that I'd camp every day, pretty much, mainly because I knew there was absolutely no way I could afford to do it if I wasn't camping. Like, I couldn't have afforded to stay in a B&B or whatever every night. And also, it just seemed like that was what you did on an adventure. Like, when I was following other people, I was following Anna McNuff at the time, who was running the length of New Zealand, and various other people, and they all were just camping everywhere. And although I'd done like a bit of camping, but I hadn't done any wild camping on my own. And I thought, like, I read about like Sean Conway, who at the time was doing a round Britain triathlon, and he seemed to just like put his tent up anywhere, like edge of a football pitch, like in a sort of pipe. And I was like, well, I'll be all right doing that, won't I? And I think completely naive, like, and even now I feel like pretty comfortable, say, like wild camping in the mountains, like where it's really remote and you're not going to see anyone, but I still wouldn't put my tent up on a football pitch on the outskirts of, I don't know, a city like Southampton or somewhere, which is what I thought I'd be doing. And what ended up happening is I started kind of sharing the journey, mostly just for like my friends and family, but then my brother spammed the link to my Facebook page on every running forum going, I think. So it kind of gained a bit of traction thanks to my brother. And so people started following me, and people started kind of offering me places to stay over the winter. Quite a lot of B&Bs and hostels really kindly gave me a room when they were quiet. So I ended up staying with like 200 complete strangers. And although I camped quite a lot in Scotland in the summer, over the winter in the South Coast, I basically didn't camp at all. And I've got no doubt that if it wasn't for those people, I wouldn't have made it through. Like, if I'd actually had to try and put my tent up when it was dark at 4 o'clock, stormy, in those kind of more built up areas, I just wouldn't have lasted. I wouldn't have lasted a week, I don't think.
There's so much like hardship going on at the moment, but stuff like that, it must really restore your like faith in humanity almost, that they're giving up their time, their space, their house to somebody that they don't know either.
Yeah, it was amazing. Like, I think the people that I felt most, because I was obviously so grateful to anybody who let me stay, and it was like it felt like a real privilege to be welcomed into these people's homes. But I think the people that I felt was most amazed by was because I stayed with quite a lot of like people from local running clubs, or people who were really into adventure, and I could kind of see why they might want to have me stay, because they were like really interested in it and they were excited to like talk about what I'm doing. Yeah, and like they were really excited. But sometimes I'd stay with people and it'd be, for instance, like someone followed me on their Facebook page, and then their parents live by the sea, so they'd say, oh, could you have this girl to stay? And so like I'd stay with like a couple who knew, clearly found it mad what I was doing, weren't like, just found it really confusing, and yet just because someone had asked them to, or like a friend of a friend of a friend or whatever, they'd let me stay with them. I think they were the people that I almost found the most like humbling, because I was like, you're just nice people, aren't you? There's like nothing in it for you, you're just letting me stay with you. And it did feel like a real privilege. I think at the beginning I always felt really a little bit on edge, because I was like, oh, do these people want me here? But I eventually realised that you don't ask someone to stay if you don't want them to stay. And I think I've got a bit more comfortable with it in the end, and tried to really like enjoy that element of it, rather than, because you know, if you like have someone around for dinner, you like buy some nice things, and then if they just sit there and turn everything down, you're a bit like, okay then, like I've invited you here. So I think I kind of started to realise that eventually. I was like, it almost was rude of me just sitting there like, no, I'll just have my tap water, and like don't be any bother. Like, people want to help you, and they don't offer to if they don't want to.
The champagne? Yeah. We'll have a couple of glasses.
You can accept a cup of tea though, I found.
Because you finished it, like you said, a few years ago, and you then wrote the book, did it kind of feel like you were reliving it? Because you spent all that time obviously doing it, and then you were in the moment when you were doing it, but after you finish, it's kind of like this big thing that almost you're like, oh, did that actually happen? But when you're then rewriting it and you're rethinking about all those things that had happened over that journey, did it kind of feel that you were reliving the whole thing?
Yeah, definitely, because I think it took me 5 years after finish. There was 5 years between finishing and releasing the book, and I liked the idea of writing about it. And when I first finished, I kept saying I'd write about it, but it just wasn't really happening. And I think I needed to have that kind of time and then be able to have a bit of perspective on the whole experience rather than just kind of it being so fresh. And I think in some ways, although I obviously had like really positive memories of it and I was like really happy I'd done it, I just kind of lumped it all together as this thing that I didn't want to do again. And then when I went to write the book, I went through all of my posts on social media, all of the videos I'd made, and like made this big spreadsheet of every day of the run to try and like remind myself what happened, because you just forget so much. And I remembered all these like smaller moments and just all the things that had made it so amazing, and people that I'd kind of forgotten about, and it was really nice to relive those moments, right, like in quite like granular detail, rather than always just thinking about it as this like big experience, because I think the best things that happened were always in those kind of like smaller moments. So yeah, it was really nice to get to relive it, and I remembered also all the like nice places that I went to. I've now got this long list of places to revisit to go on holiday.
What was that moment like then when you finished? Because obviously it was jubilant, and we'll go back to some of the highlights in a sec, but that moment must have been amazing. But then you spent 11 months doing this one thing and then it's done. That moment after must be a bit like, oh, like, what to do now?
Yeah, I think the finish line was a bit weird, because I think like, and I'm sure you like know this, if you do like a race, like a 1 day race, or even something over like a week or so, but it's like you're really tested to your limits, you get to that finish line and you literally can't do another step, can you? You're like, I've got to stop running.
It's so like weird though, because your brain, like if you had to do another day, you would, yeah. But your brain's just like, nah.
Yeah, and you're like euphoric at the finish line, aren't you? Just because you don't have to run anymore. Whereas I think because the intensity of the whole thing was a lot lower, I got to the finish line, I'd actually had a rest day the day before, because I'd like put a few buffer days in the schedule and told my friends and family when I was going to finish, and then I didn't need them. So kind of physically, I felt fine really. Like, and if anything, I felt better than when I'd started, because I kind of built up this mileage and I was a lot fitter. So it was very different to finishing a kind of a more intense challenge, I guess, where you get to that finish line and you're just like, I'm done. And it was weird because I think it was the contrast between the fact that before I went and did this thing, adventure and running and stuff just hadn't been a big part of my life really. And then it had been this all-consuming thing for a year, and then I finished, and it took me quite a long time to work out any kind of balance with those two things, because I moved straight back to London, got a full-time job again because I had no money and I had to, and just went back to kind of like, I lived with one of my best friends from uni, like went to the pub a lot, and it took me a long time to like feed running and being outside into a more like normal life, I guess. Whereas, because I think I've only experienced it really all or nothing.
It's kind of weird, because it's almost like there are those in your, early 20s, it's like there's this uni and then job and then massive adventure and then back. It's like everything's very sort of in its own little place, so it's kind of, I guess, blending everything together. Did you find that a little bit hard to start with?
Yeah, and I think I feel like obviously I'm really lucky now to have kind of made like all of the, like, I work freelance and like doing stuff like in the adventure and running sort of worlds and having been able to kind of make that my career, I guess, I feel really lucky about. But I think I feel really strongly that you don't have to quit your job and go on an adventure for a year. And there's so much, and it's kind of feeding that stuff into day-to-day life. Like until a couple of years ago, I did 4 years after the adventure of working kind of 9 to 5 and very normal office jobs. But by the end of that, I was like running a lot and going away every weekend and using all of my annual leave to do adventures. And I think in some ways that was almost like more rewarding. And it's like and I was doing so much stuff with my friends, and I think this, like, just going for like a 10-mile run with an early alarm to see the sunrise with a friend before work can be as rewarding as going on like a big trip. And I think it doesn't have to be as all or nothing. And I think it can feel a bit off-putting. And also it's like a bit patronizing to suggest to people that they've got to like quit their job to go on an adventure, because they're completely impractical I was so lucky to be able to do that at that time, but a lot of people can't do that. And also, like, a lot of people have got jobs they've worked really hard at. They don't want to quit them and go running for 10 months. And I think I don't like adventure being like framed in that all or nothing way, because I think there's so much you can do, like weekends after work, whatever.
I like just setting yourself the little goals, and you said it there, like getting up, doing a 10-mile run and seeing the sunrise. Like on a Friday night, if you haven't got anything on a Saturday morning, you think to yourself, right, I've had a hard day at work, but I want something for me. I'm going to set an alarm for 6:30. I'm going to get up, I'm going to go and do a half marathon, and then I'm going to go and have some breakfast somewhere nice. Like, it's those little things that, like, even though they're like not a big adventure or even a race, they're things that you say you're going to do and then you do. And I don't know, it's something about that reward that makes you feel good, doesn't it? Which is kind of like more small little mini adventures, I guess, on their own.
Yeah, and I think just getting into that habit of like, I think I could be a bit all or nothing sometimes. So I'm like, well, if I'm not going to be able to do something perfectly, then I'm not going to bother. But I think it's just getting to that habit of being like, no, I'm going for a run today, even if I've only got half an hour or whatever it is, and doing those kind of small things. I think the people I like admire most are my friends who are like amazing runners, while also having very like normal lives and not posting every run on Instagram like I do.
I found it recently with, like, I've only just really started running and like actually enjoying it sometimes because I was of this mindset. I guess it's the same as this all or nothing thing of, I'm going to go and I'm going to run as hard as I physically can on every single run, and I'm going to get back and I'm going to look like a tomato for 3 hours because I'm not going to be able to cool down because I've worked so hard. And then you just don't enjoy it, do you? You come back from like a 7, 10, 15-mile run and you're knackered for the rest of the day, whereas you can actually go and do quite a nice run, just slow down your ego and slow down your pace a little bit, and then the rest of the day is enjoyable.
Yeah, it's funny that like I always think whenever I'm doing like a sort of endurance event or running an ultra or something, which I do still love doing, and there is something we obviously enjoy about the like breaking yourself part. But when I always think like it's like 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning and you're waking up to like get to a race start line, I always just think normal people would like sleep till 8 o'clock and go to park. Like, what am I doing? But I mean, I obviously do enjoy that for some inexplicable reason.
I mean, normal people would probably sleep till after 8 o'clock and not get up for a park run, to be fair. On your journey then around the UK, what were the highlights and what were the lowlights? I know it's so hard to pick anything out, but there's a book to go and read if you want the whole story. But for you, what are those things that stand out, and what are those things that maybe stand out because they were lower moments?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the low ones and then can finish more positively. Yeah. I think the lowest moment I would say was I'd actually come home for the weekend. I had a family event. It was one of only 2 weekends that I kind of left the coast and came home, and it was about, I think it was late February, early March. So I'd been going for like 4 months. I was in South Wales. I'd done the whole South Coast at this point. And I think the hardest thing about it always was the like never endingness of it. And I almost like forgot about thinking about if I was actually enjoying it, and just got so overwhelmed by like how much there was still to do. And I think it's easy to do that on kind of just going for a run for one day as well, isn't it? You're just like, oh, I've got another 20 miles to run. It almost becomes irrelevant if you're having a nice time at that moment. And I think I just also kept thinking, like, why did I not pick something a bit shorter? Because I was like, if I'd picked a 1,000-mile route to run, that's a ridiculously long way. Everyone would be very impressed because it was me. I've never done anything like that before. And I was like, but I picked this. I've got to do another 4,000 miles on top of this. And I remember just crying all the way on this train back to Swansea, where I was picking up the coast. And people kept asking me if I was okay. And I was like, oh, I've got to go for a run. So nobody had any sympathy for me. unsurprisingly. And I think that was what I found really hard, and it was a real conscious effort. I kind of tried to make a real effort after that to just think like, am I having a nice time now? Like, I don't need to worry about the fact I've got 6 months to go, because that's just not helpful thinking at all. But I think it's like, I think it's really easy to like, you want like instant gratification, don't you? And I think anything that happens over a long time frame is just really hard to like get your head around. I did read some sort of study about how social media has just screwed us up with that, because you like put something on Instagram and you get all your likes and you get your buzz, and people working for things like PhDs and stuff, like apparently it's actually really negatively impacted doing stuff like that, because
like I find it with TV, you're like, the amount of Netflix shows that I've watched the first like 3 minutes of, the same thing, isn't it? It's just like, well, I need to think about and it's the same with that, you need to think about the long goal, but in that moment you're just like, nah.
But I also, what I was really aware of was I kind of wanted it to be enjoyable. I was like, if I'm absolutely, I'd hate it when you like see people on adventures and they're just moaning about it the whole time, because I was like, we've chosen to do these things. Most of us aren't like elite athletes. We're not like breaking records. So it's like, you should be enjoyable, I think, on some level. And I think even the bits that are like really grimy, when you're like out on a long run in the rain, I'm kind of secretly enjoying that. So I think I didn't want to be actually miserable. So I had this rule where if I was having a really bad day, if 2 weeks from that point I was still completely miserable, I was allowed to consider like, maybe this isn't for me. But if in that time a really good day happened or something good happened at all, I kind of reset that clock, and that kind of like, and then I just had to tell myself, I've just got to do 2 more weeks, and I could always do 2 more weeks.
It just adds up then, doesn't it? And it kind of, everything comes together, and then suddenly you run 11 months and run the whole coast.
It's got to break it down into chunks, I guess.
What about highlights then?
So I'd say my highlight of the whole run was, because there were obviously amazing bits. Like I remember getting to John O'Groats, and at that point I was like, right, I'm on the home straight now. I've just got to go down the east coast of England, which it's weird how your like reference points just get so
just the east coast.
But I was like, right, I'm nearly home now. I was like, I can do it now. And so there were amazing big moments like that. But one thing that really sticks out to me is I was running in the Highlands of Scotland. I was going up towards where Tongue is, which is kind of the eastern side of that like strip at the top of Scotland. And it was this really wet day. I think I was doing about 30 miles. It was quite a long day. It was chucking it down. And I was planning to just wild camp at some point. But I hadn't been past a shop, so all I was going to be able to have for dinner was I had some oats, and then I got my filter bottle to fill up some like pond water and squeeze it into these cold oats. And I was really trying to psych myself up for cold oats and pond water for dinner, basically. And I was like, oh, it's going to be grim, isn't it? And all the places that I thought I might camp were like really boggy and not really campable. And then I remember there was a campsite just up ahead, like in Tongue, basically. And I was like, oh, at least I'll stay there then. At least I can like have a shower and go to the toilets and get some non-pond water. And then I remember that they had a hostel like attached to it. And I got there just before reception closed. They had 1 bed left. They sold like ready meals, so you could like go make them in the kitchen. They had beers, sweets. And then I remember going to have a shower and sitting in front of the fire with a Thai green curry, a packet of minstrels and a beer. And I've just never been so happy and warm in my whole life. So I think it was the best £15 I've ever spent. And loads of people that day had kept driving past me and offering me a lift. And I kept thinking, I really would like a lift. And it turned out they were all heading for this hostel. And then when I got to the kitchen, they all cheered. And they were like, you might never make it. So that was my best moment. But I think that's what I love. Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, I think that kind of sums up what I love about like long distance adventures and running and hiking and stuff, that everything just gets simplified so much until all you care about is being warm, having some food, and then stuff that normally, like, I wouldn't normally be that excited about a ready meal, but it was like the most gourmet best meal of my whole life. And I think that's what I love about it. Like, you just put on a warm jumper, have a cup of tea, and you're like, well, this is fantastic, isn't it?
I absolutely love the phrase non-pond water. That's so good. I mean, that's the name of a book or a podcast or something. Yeah. Non-pond water is so good. So from all of your experiences, and then from writing everything down, and then from everything you've done since then, you would have learned a lot of lessons about yourself, and you would have learned a lot of lessons about what running means to you and what adventure means to you. For somebody that might be watching this who's thinking about lacing their trainers up or going out for a run for the first time, like, what would be your advice to them, I guess?
I guess the main thing that I say this a lot about running around the coast is that you don't have to be the best runner. Like, you don't have to be a really talented athlete. You just have to like be like, I was the first woman to do this route, and that is not because I'm a particularly good runner. There are thousands, hundreds better runners than me out there, but you just have to be the one who like has a go. And like, so I think just don't worry about how good you are. It's not relevant. And I think it's easy to see other people and be like, oh, well, yeah, they're a better runner than me, and it's just like not relevant. And I think what I like about ultra running is I think it's actually quite accessible, because you, especially the sort of shorter end of ultra distances, is because you can just like plod along and you'll get to the finish line, and that's all that matters. Whereas I find sometimes with like shorter distances, if you're doing kind of 5k, 10k, half marathon, you do it, then everyone asks what your time is, and you're like, well, I was just having a nice time today. And I think I like the fact with running, it's not like that. It's so much more about the experience. Like, I'd rather run 50k than like a half marathon PB any day. You can like stop, have a sandwich, take a picture. And I think people would be surprised by how achievable those scary distances are just by like slowing down and relaxing into it a bit.
Big thank you to Elise for coming on RunThrough TV. Inchy great. She is inchy. Stick it a thumbs up this video. Make sure you subscribe as well. And if you've got any guests you'd like to see here on RunThrough TV in the not too distant future, then pop them in the comment section below. I've got some good ones lined up, but I'd love to hear from you as well.